how selfish are we as a species? Does it really have to come down to a choice between $100 or not having a planet anymore? That's the kind of stuff that really is at the heart of this play. And I always like to tell my playwriting students that having anger as a thing that sort of inspires you is a can be quite productive for a writer. I tend to kind of feed off anger of different sorts in plays, and that's the one that sort of drives this play.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Play, a podcast series from Theatre New Brunswick. With summer slowly coming to an end, it's time to start looking towards the fall and our first production of the season, Wood Buffalo, by Len Falkenstein. Len is a director of drama at the University of New Brunswick and has been the driving force behind two Fredericton summer theatre institutions, Bard in the Barracks and the Notable Acts Theatre Festival, for more than 20 years now. He's a published playwright, and according to one local radio host, he's also the grand poobah of theatre in Fredericton. We're very excited and honored to welcome Len to our stage for the world premiere production of his new play. Etched through with compassion, humor, and more than a touch of magic, Wood Buffalo is a sweeping Canadian epic that tells the story of the Wood Buffalo region of northern Alberta, from colonization to the year 2070, through intertwined narratives of a set of characters from across the country who are drawn to Canada's oil sands to seek a better life. Wood Buffalo runs November 8th to 12th at the Open Space Theatre in Fredericton before touring the province with performances in Florenceville, Bristol, Dalhousie, Bathurst, Moncton, St. Andrews, and St. John. Tickets for all performances are on sale now at tnb.nb.ca. Earlier this summer, TNB Outreach Coordinator Jenna McLean caught up with Len to talk about the long development process that led to the creation of Wood Buffalo and the play's many themes. Here's their conversation.
So I feel like we should start with the question when you talk about plays. Can you tell me a bit about the inspiration for Wood Buffalo? Where did the story come from? Why was it a play you had to write?
Sure. Well, I think there's a few answers to that question. This play kind of grew out of my previous play, Black Athabasca, which was partially set in Fort McMurray.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I've always had sort of an abiding interest in the oil industry and sort of the extractive industries in Canada. And I grew up in a region that was dominated by it was a farming community when I was a child, but by the time I left high school, oil had become the main industry in the town, heavy oil production. So I grew up on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. And lived in Alberta for about 10 years while I was doing my PhD. So, I guess the other part of the equation is that I'm a bit of a political animal, and I'm an environmentalist, and
I couldn't tell at all reading them.
No. Yeah. So if you are political and you're into the environment and you care about the environment, the oil industry in Canada and Fort McMurray and everything that it represents is kind of it's the locus of everything. It's at the center of everything.
100%.
So I thought that, if I'm going to be true to what my interests are, I've long had an interest in just Fort McMurray as a location that is so central to Canada. And if I want to write a play that is kind of about Canada and the climate crisis and how we're all part of that, writing a play about Wood Buffalo, which is the region that Fort McMurray is in, would be a good place to start.
100%. Yeah. So can you, with that, walk me a bit through the development process of the script? How do we get from, I think I'm going to write about Fort McMurray, I think it's time, to a world premiere of a play that's happening?
Yeah, well, it's a long story.
Great, I'm here for it.
It's been quite a while. With the pandemic playing a big part in that.
Mhm.
But yes, I was very lucky to be artist in residence for TNB some years ago. The last year that Thomas Morgan Jones was here, he invited me to be artist in residence,
Mhm.
playwright in residence, and I pitched this play to him as something that I was interested in, and I'm thinking, TNB is not going to be interested in the play about Alberta, right? And he's like,
Right.
no, you gotta write what you want to, what you care about, what you're interested in. And he said, go ahead. And it happened to be a year when the Banff Playwrights Retreat was encouraging very large cast plays. And I thought I could write one of those. And I didn't get into Banff, but nonetheless,
Alas.
I ended up writing a very large play. But the play is really it really came out of uh, a few trips that I've made to Fort McMurray,
Mhm.
and the so many of the characters, so many of the locations in the play, so many of the scenes are directly the result of my having traveled there to do research and talk to people. Um, Characters are based on people that I've met there, or in some ways, fictional characters that I had have been shaped subsequently by meeting kind of their real life equivalents.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been in development for 4 or 5 years. I've forgotten how long.
Time is weird. I don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, pandemic sort of interrupted plans for the production here, but so thrilled that it is finally happening, and all these strange and wonderful things that have been in my head for so long are actually going to come to life on stage.
Truly, the most magical part of playwriting is being like, I don't know about this, and people being like, well, yeah, we'll do that, can be part of it. We'll do it. Like it's the
Mm,
writing impossible stage directions or unsolvable questions, and then people get to figure out how to make those happen. Yeah. So we kind of talked a bit about the pandemic putting things on pause, but it also presented kind of another opportunity to further the work through the 2020 Fall Festival of New Plays, which we were both a
mm,
part of, and Wood Buffalo was a script he worked on with that. So it received some workshopping, eventually had a public reading on Zoom. Can you talk a
mhm.
bit about what that process was like and what discoveries you made?
Sure. Yeah. So this place had a couple of workshops.
Mhm.
The very first one was at Humber College with Rob Kempson's
Yes.
playwriting class there.
Mhm.
Um, Playwriting workshop class. So Rob, the director, who's going to be directing with Buffalo, is an old friend of mine from my previous play. So he got the very first draft, which was immensely sort of 4 hour long version of the play that his students got to read, and we sat through that, and that was yeah, it was wonderful, and they
Mhm.
they were so committed, so enthusiastic, and I got so much out of just their feedback. We had good conversations about all the characters, the storylines, throughout the process. What's
Mhm.
always been most useful to me is just hearing what characters, what storylines people connected with the most and why, and that tells me a lot about what's working well for an audience member and what isn't.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was great to have. So that was in, I believe, 2019.
Sure.
Yeah, I think so.
It could be 2019, sure.
Sure. Yeah. And then in 2020, yeah, it was great to have another go at things with the TNB Fall Festival. This time, with a revised script, and a somewhat shorter script, and a fully professional cast.
Mhm.
We had a chance to spend have a few sessions with the play, to have a few goes at it. Again, really valuable to just hear the work, and also to get to have conversations with the actors, who are all really smart and thoughtful, and who are able to give me ideas about their characters, and things that I could steal, which is what playwrights do best sometimes.
100%. Yes. It's all about stealing from the world around you. Yeah.
Yeah. So very grateful to TNB for having had that workshop opportunity, and having Rob sort of as a constant throughout the process has been great as well.
Yeah, that's really special. I didn't know about the Humber reading, but to know that he's been with the project through so many iterations is so special, because it also means that on some level he really understands what you're trying to do with the play. So it's not this thing of like, you show up and meet the director and it's like getting on the same page. Like, you're already on the same page. You like wrote the page together. Yeah. That's so special. I'm really interested in how the play explores perseverance as a theme, both in a positive and a kind of negative light. At one point, a beaver says, "I don't know if I'll have the strength to rebuild again, but what else can we do?" And we see people stay in familiar situations in wood buffalo, even if it's not necessarily what they might want or think is best for them, in a like metaphysical sense, but also in a physical sense of the places literally harming them. Can you talk a bit about perseverance as a theme in the play and how the work explores it? Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about that so much. So thank you for that.
I got you.
Yes, now that you mention it, I guess that is there, isn't it? And I like that you said that it's both for good and bad, which is true. Because I think a big idea in the play is largely about the need for change. It's about the fact that we've created an industry that is in many ways kind of killing us, and we need to transition out of fossil fuels, and we need to entirely change the way that we live, pretty radically, if we're going to have a civilization a few generations from now. But of course, for human beings, change is one of the hardest things to do. And I don't want to pick on Alberta, but
maybe it's okay in this capacity, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, but Alberta has kind of not shown the greatest ability to change in its thinking and its politics. The most recent election kind of demonstrated that yet again. So we're having the same old arguments about climate change and industry, and how we definitely cannot have things like carbon taxes or even sales taxes in Alberta. So perseverance can be a bad thing, but it's also a positive thing, in the sense that human beings are malleable, and we can endure, and we can adapt, and we can evolve, and we do need to have stick-to-itiveness to get through the many challenges that life presents us. And as much as this play is bleak at times, it's also, I think, ultimately kind of optimistic too.
I would agree 100%. Yeah.
That ultimately, if we can adapt, if we can, do what we need to do to change, there is hope for us. So yeah, and that's played out through many different characters and situations in the play. But yeah, thanks, Jenna, for making me think about that.
Well, I'm glad you brought up change, because it was something I was so struck by, but hadn't fully formulated a question. It was just kind of like, in A Visit to a Small Planet by Eleanor Fuchs, this notion of change is introduced in like, a play should ask change of you in some way, a change, even if it's a change in world, character, whatever, an audience. And I think that is something so special about Wood Buffalo, is it's not only asking you, the audience, to consider this change, but it's presenting so many huge changes and small changes. And by the end of the play, the world is so wholly transformed. And I don't want to give anything away, but I think on your mentioning of hope and optimism, I think the people we end the play with really rooted in that hope and optimism for me. The people and the animals we end the play with really landed there for me. So 100%. Yeah. I also really love, in that vein, the way that the script gives a choral voice to the natural world. We're reminded of the impact of our actions, the way industry degrades the land and the humans doing the degrading, and how our new homes eradicate the homes of countless animals. There's that scene in particular where it's like a corporate nothing speech about industry and housing juxtaposed directly against the animals inventorying the chickadees that are on that land that are not going to have that land anymore, the trees. Like, it's such a clear juxtaposition that really makes you sit with those things. But in giving voice to to nature and having animals almost as narrators, it moves us through time and space and also keeps the audience culpable in the actions happening. So can you talk a bit more about giving voice to nature in this play?
Yeah. And interestingly, that's been something it's been in the play from the beginning, but I've probably had the hardest time with.
Yeah.
But everybody that I've worked on with the play, when I'm feeling like, I don't know how to write voices for these animals, they're like, no, the animals. And I was like, I got to cut something. I can cut the animal. No, you can cut the animals.
Not the animals.
Yeah. So that's, my dramaturg, Meg Brom, has been very, very vocal about that. It's like, you are not cutting the animals. So no, I'm not, because they're important. And it's just me as a writer needing to decide, what their voices are. But yes, one of the great things that came out of the 2020 workshop was one of the actors came up with this brilliant, way of conceiving the play, which is sort of concentric circles. And at the center of the circle, there's sort of our five main characters. And outside of that circle, there's some subsidiary, secondary characters. And outside of that circle, there's these crazy historical characters who are kind of ghosts from the past who wander in and out of the play.
I love them. They're unhinged, and I love them.
Yeah, they're pretty funny. They're a lot of fun. And then the ultimate circle is the land and the animals, and they are the constant. They're the thing that's was here before us and is going to probably be here after us as well. And they're the thing that's most affected by us. So it's important in a play that is about the land and how we, as you put it, very well, degrade and use and exploit the land. That these are kind of the innocent victims. They're sort of a voice of conscience for us, and should be. And so, yes, it's important to have the land represented as a character and as the primary force in all of this. And, in some of my more pessimistic moments, I just sort of think about, we human beings, we're not the greatest thing that ever came along. And so, I just hope that, I care about the environment more than I care about human beings sometimes. Because I don't know if we're worthy of the care that we bestow on ourselves sometimes, but that's just a bleak me talking. Because I've got to have hope that we can come around and try to get back to living in harmony with this planet.
Yeah, I think there's something There's something really true in that, though, of like, if we are like the supposed best thing that's happened to the planet, and this is how we're treating it, are we actually? Like, are we actually? If we're the ones who, the thing that like really comes to mind is after the Fort McMurray fire, and Jackie is like walking through the devastation and talking about it, and she encounters all these animals. We hear directly from these animals about their experiences in the fire, because of the fire, and even the ones that are like, I got to eat, but it tasted like plastic, but what other option did I have? Like, that to me feels like the cost of the work in the industry. It's not, yes, it is a tragedy that all these homes were lost, that these things were lost, that these memories and like the physical objects that hold memory are gone. But it's also about this rabbit that can't find water, or this beaver that found home at this great cost and then had to come back. Like, it's, that to me is the cost that you're exploring in the play. And I think it's really focused in a way that then makes it easier to like zoom out and think about, oh, well, how am I impacting? How am I contributing to that? How am I culpable? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And and the human beings in the play are, many of them pay a great price as well. And I wanted to write a play that delves more into the cost that people who work in extractive industries in a place like Fort McMurray, the impact on their personal lives, their family lives. So yeah, if we remove the land and the animals from the equation for a moment, just the human impacts that we pay for our prosperity and our comfortable lives, just what so many people who work in that chain of industry, the cost that they pay personally is staggering.
Yeah. We pay for our prosperity. Oh, I'm going to be thinking about that later. Yeah, 100%. Kind of on that note, there's a really clear tension in the play around how humanity attempts to control nature and how utterly pointless that is. Whether it's people agreeing or not about this idea, whether it's even possible. Can you talk a bit more about how Wood Buffalo explores the attempts to control an uncontrollable force?
Sure. Yeah, it is uncontrollable. So Fort McMurray exists as a city. It was there before oil, but as a small, very small settlement. That was sort of a fur trading post originally.
Just a little downtown. That's it.
Yeah. And of course, indigenous people long before it was, any sort of, pardon me, human settlement. But then it's now become this city of 80,000 people, kind of in the middle of nowhere, because a single industry exists there. So you've created an urban environment out of nothing, and after a certain amount of time, not in a not too distant future, that industry is going to gradually wither and die. And that community is going to recede probably back to what it was many decades ago. And it's going to be reclaimed by nature again. And the fires that we're having right now, not just the one in Fort McMurray, but as we're recording this interview.
I was going to ask you about this, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. Wildfires are raging all across Canada.
And shrouding all of North America in disgusting orange smoke. It's wild, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the Fort McMurray fire is a central chapter in Wood Buffalo, my play. And it's kind of that ultimate sort of clapback from nature in a way, right? You create this industry that contributes to global warming. Global warming results in fires, and a fire takes out this town that where the industry is located. There's just something kind of undeniably karmic about that sort of circle of things.
It's Greek tragedy,
Yeah,
karma is what
it
it is.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the hubris of us human beings believing that we can control nature in some fashion, but we're Canadians. We live in a place that would kill us in the winter without a house that is heated somehow. We need to create environments that we can live in as humans, but we also have done so in a way that is really out of step with what our environment can support. So here we are trying to balance our needs with our responsibilities to the planet, and try to find a path forward that's going to allow us to still be here, a few hundred years from now.
Yeah, it's especially interesting to me because, in a way, not to draw a comparison to another extraction industry, the Fort McMurray fire is almost like the canary in a coal mine. Like, it's the warning of what is going to come. It is, hey, this is what's going to happen on a wider scale if this is what we keep doing. And we just kept doing all of those things. And it's like, in a way, should we be surprised by what's going on? Like, obviously it's terrible and so much should have been done before we got to this point to stop us to getting to this point. But it's like, of course this is what's happening if we don't regulate these things, if we're not doing carbon taxes, if like, it's wild. How does that feel to spend so much time in this play writing about these things, writing about the doom that is coming if climate change continues at the pace it is, and then to see it playing out like it is right now with these wildfires and the smoke that's everywhere? Like, what does that feel like?
It's as gratifying as it may be to be like, aha,
You're like, I was right.
I was right.
Yeah.
I am a prophet, but it's not no genius star for that, right? It's kind of obvious. It's kind of sickening, sickening, to be quite honest. But what's beyond sickening, what's really sort of infuriating is just to see among our political classes just the level of sheer denialism, and the level of, Blaine Higgs was talking yesterday about, the Irvings are potentially going to sell their company. And it's, according to him, it's because the government is imposing too many taxes on the oil industry, even in the midst of these fires that are going on.
Yeah, it's like, Irving, is now a good time to be talking about this? Like, do we maybe not have other things we could be paying attention to?
Yeah, and the Alberta election that happened, and Danielle Smith is talking about how she's going to stand up to Ottawa, and so I've actually, in the play, as a little fun thing, I've got a character in the form of Ernest Manning, who is a former premier of Alberta, and was kind of a pioneer of the oil industry. And I had a little fun with making him kind of come around in the play to realizing the wrongness of certain facets of what he formerly preached. So it was kind of fun to take a figure like that, even as I much, kind of wish to see that kind of conversion happening among the Pierre Poilievres of the world, which will never happen.
No, not as long as there's money in the grift. Not as long. No. Yeah.
And the thing that makes it worse is that it's always sold as, what the effect will be on the common people. Middle class can't handle these taxes, and you're like, seriously, you can't pay $100 more in a year for your gas?
Or what if we just taxed rich people at a fair rate?
Yeah, or that too, you know? Uh, how selfish are we as a species? Um,
Yeah.
does it really have to come down to a choice between $100 or not having a planet anymore? You know,
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff that really is at the heart of this play, and I always like to tell my playwriting students that you know, having anger as a thing that sort of inspires you is a can be quite productive for a writer.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I tend to kind of feed off anger of different sorts in plays, and that's the one that sort of drives this play.
Yeah.
Even as it's, not that necessarily angry a play, it's quite funny in places too.
Yeah, you can feel the passion behind it 100%. I think anger is 100% a motivating force behind some of my work as a writer. And I can't remember who, another playwright said once, it's some like panel I went to, that anger is really helpful because it's activating and you have to find a way to make it move through you. Because if you're just angry, that's not helping anybody, but it's what you do with it that
Hmm.
is helpful or cathartic or points to something we should be talking about. And I think you can feel like the anger in Wood Buffalo moves to something. It moves to
Hmm.
like a place of understanding and a provocation to the audience to think about what they're doing. Yeah, it moves you 100%.
Hmm.
Yeah, you kind of brought up time, and it was a thing that I'm really curious about with this play. Early on in the script, you introduce this notion of being stuck in time, and we have these historical figures who kind of outlive themselves in a way, and we see them engage with what the oil industry has become. And we follow a clear through line, but it's like time in the past can't help but break in to intervene, which causes all these ripples across the rest of the play. So could you just talk a bit more about how time works in Wood Buffalo?
Sure. Yeah. Originally the play was going to, have sort of three parts to it, and one was going to be set in the early, yeah, the 1800s, and one was going to be in the present day, and one was going to be in the future, and that didn't quite end up happening. There is still present, past, present, and future in the play. But it mainly concentrates on the present, or at least the last 10 years or so. The period from 2013 to about 2020 is the main time period of the play.
The moment of toasting 2020 did the same thing. It's not
Yeah.
funny anyway. Like it's funny, but it's like, oh, very real. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Uh, but yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about going to the place. Was really formative in writing the play, because one of the first things I did when I went to Fort McMurray was I went to the Oil Sands Discovery Center, which is the museum in Fort McMurray that is dedicated to the oil industry. And they've got a film that they run in their theater that sort of is about the history of the development of the oil sands, and it's quite interesting and fascinating. But just from watching that film, I came out of it with, three great characters in the figure of Peter Pond, an explorer, the settler discoverer, if you want to put that in quotation marks, of
The
Fort
heaviest
McMurray.
of quotation marks.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Uh, Oscar von Hammerstein, who was a German oil baron, and represents kind of the profiteering type of entrepreneur who has been present in the industry throughout, and then Ernest Manning, the premier that I talked about earlier. but they exist to kind of give a bit of a historical context to the events that take place in the present. And they, through a form of magic, have become eternal, and they therefore exist in the past, in the present, and in the future as well. Kind of as ghosts, somewhat omniscient overseers.
They're kind of Dickensian.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who are able to, talk to the contemporary characters and give, slap them upside the head a little bit at times, and are able to, I guess, give us a kind of a perspective that says, oh, right, before the oil industry, there was the fur trade, which was kind of the same thing, but with just a different commodity. Or to be able to put us in perspective and say, oh, right, there's a whole global element to this industry too. We're not just talking about Canada, but we're kind of in a whole global system where we're kind of, as much as we are important, we're a bit of a two-bit player too. So it was fun to have this play where, and it just means that just about anything is possible, just in terms of what can happen in the world of the play. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about how time operates, and it's both freeing, and it's also caused a bit of its own, headaches as well, as far as figuring out how all the rules of this strange place work.
There's nothing more fun as a playwright than like introducing a really exciting concept and then someone being like, but how does it work? And then you have to figure it out. And it's like, but I didn't want to. The reason I introduced this big weird thing is so I didn't have to think about why it worked. I just wanted to do the weird thing on stage, but it has to mean something. Yeah.
Wanted to make some fun jokes, but yeah.
But now I need to explain how time works in this world. Exactly. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah, there's also something. You kind of talked about it earlier with Manning kind of reckoning with what he's wrought in a way that I think is really gracious and optimistic again. And it's kind of like, it's proposing that if you remove somebody from the context and give them an overview, you let them see what grows from the seeds they're watering, that they'll have a moment of recognition, maybe not full Oedipal moment of, oh, I am the responsible for this plague. Oh no, oh God. But that moment of like, oh, this is what I am part of this. Like that moment of recognition and like allowing these ghosts that moment of recognition, I think is really gracious. And again, gives us hope of like, maybe one day we'll realize what we're doing is wrong and we'll wake up all at the same time. Wow, I just said time so weirdly. All wake up at the same time and realize and like agree to move forward together. I think there's that sense of hope is really interesting and kind of beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks. I couldn't put that better myself. So yeah.
I got you. I already asked that question. Yeah. So kind of in that vein, how did you balance historical accuracy around the development of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, about the fire in Fort McMurray, about the people that you interacted with the story you wanted to tell? There's Fort McMurray and the people who inhabit it are such like, it's its own character and a play, which is just like a Russian nesting doll of other characters. But you get the sense that there's a real respect for the history and the people, even while you're maybe poking holes at some things and pointing out some shady things that we should be talking about. So yeah, can you talk about balancing history and the story you wanted to tell?
Sure. Yeah, this is a factually based work. I didn't want to write a play that was a documentary, so it's not a verbatim play. It's not nothing but pure unadulterated fact. I did have a fictional purpose in mind, so I'm melding those two things. But I'm also someone likes to think that I'm fairly kind of, fair-minded, and while I do have, certain, obvious political leanings and beliefs, I also like to think of myself as someone who likes to try to put myself in the shoes of the other side and try to understand where they're coming from.
Mhm.
And it was very important to me to be factually accurate and to represent people fairly. And no surprise, my perception of Fort McMurray changed a lot when I actually went there and talked to people and saw the place. And I've gone there 3 different times, over, the most recent trip being just a few weeks ago.
Oh,
But
whoa, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So during the midst of the election campaign, um, uh, and each time I go there, I kind of get more sympathetic with the place, and I come away, and then I spend a while away, and I get more critical. But yeah, so a lot of research has gone into the play, about the history, about the facts, lots of just um, a really great book, if anybody's interested in exploring this subject further, is Chris Turner's The Patch.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, it won one of those nonfiction awards a few years ago. It's sort of a very detailed um, account of the oil industry, and particularly in Fort McMurray, written by someone who is, a leading voice in the environmental movement. But he's also, very fair-minded and got a great deal of respect, for the individuals, who work in the industry. I should really be giving him almost a co-writing credit, because my play is very, very much inspired by his book.
Mhm.
Um, Combined with, as I said, a lot of trips there. I talked to people from all walks of life over the years. I've talked to 2 different mayors of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, um, uh, immigrants, people who work in the oil industry in different capacities, regular, waitresses and teachers, and um, people from indigenous communities. And so it was important to me to get their voices right and be fair to them.
Mhm.
But I'm also a writer, and I'm crafting a work that has an agenda of sorts. So I'm not totally sure if the guy who works security, in my play really would have, the job of patrolling the tailings ponds,
Mhm.
but in my play, he does. So there's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and and yeah, so what I've come out with, I like to think anyway, is a play that is polemical, that will challenge people's ideas, but that I like to think is also not overly, that is balanced, that is to a certain degree objective, and is fair to everyone who lives in this place,
Mhm.
and is, representative of what all of us as Canadians, our relationship to the
Mhm.
industry and to Fort McMurray as well. That's
Mhm.
another, thing that makes Fort McMurray such an important topic in my mind, is that we all know somebody who's lived there or
Yep.
gone there, or it draws people from all across Canada. It's this nexus, as much as a Toronto is, but in a different kind of way, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's I think there's something really rich in the idea of like a surprise melting pot or a surprise hub of generations of cultures. And it's like Northern Alberta is not what I would picture if I'm picturing like all these different worlds colliding and all these different walks of life colliding. But it's like, yeah, it's like a
Yeah, and
surprise, like, hello, it's here. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that I was, was most eye-opening for me was before going to Fort McMurray the first time, like a lot of people, I probably had the perception this is going to be a very white place, but it's as multicultural as the other major cities in Canada. It's as multicultural as a Toronto or a Vancouver is. So it's pretty fascinating from that perspective.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. Okay. How is Wood Buffalo similar to your other work? How is it different from your other work?
Yeah, well, it's similar, I would say, in its driving preoccupations. I have been writing a series of plays that I guess are about the environment and our relationship to the land and the environment over the last while. I guess all my recent plays I think have been variations on that theme. Um, I I tend to write works that place characters in ethical dilemmas. And I'd say that, every character in this play is in the midst of one or more ethical dilemmas, having to do with their work or their personal relationships or a combination of the two, or their work in relation to the environment.
Yeah.
The compromises that we make with ourselves is something that interests me a lot, and how we live our values and morals and our politics, how those things relate to one another and play out as individuals is something that I tend to focus on a lot in plays.
Mhm.
It's different from my other works in that it's just on a much larger scale.
It's
My
a
last
big
play,
play.
yeah, my last play was, an 85-minute play, and I wrote it in a month. And this is,
You wrote a play in a month, also.
yeah.
How dare you? That's such a great timeline.
Well, that one I was spot in the Fringe Festival, so I had a very
Ah,
strict
needs
deadline.
must, right?
I didn't, I unfortunately did not have that strict deadline this time, so it took me 4 years instead.
Mhm.
Um, there's a chorus. There are choruses in this play, and that's one of the fun things about the work is I've got these moments where we suddenly kind of have these moments that are a little bit long, like song and dance numbers, but they are instead kind of the voices of many, many different people from the place at a particular time.
Mhm.
And that's something that I've done before in works too. I like works that are choral, that are a bit of a collage, and
Yes.
kind of a collage effect is something that I think I do as a writer. I like to juxtapose images or storylines or characters that have a kind of a connection,
Mhm.
but it may be an ironic connection, or it may be a contradictory connection, or it may be a mirroring sort of connection, but sort of an interconnected web of stories and characters that reflect and refract, and echo, is I guess something that's something that I like to do,
Yeah.
and that's probably what I've done in this play, but yeah, on a larger scale than I'm used to doing.
Yeah, the dial is turned up to like 11 or 12
Yeah,
here.
kind of,
Yeah.
kind of.
Mhm. What does it mean for this world premiere to be happening with Theatre New Brunswick?
Oh, it's everything. It's really everything. Yeah, it's my first play, by TNB. It's my first ever professional production, to be honest. Yeah, at the ripe old age that I am. And having done a lot of plays before, it's the first time that I'm having a fully professional production of one of my plays, and to have it being done by TNB is a dream come true. Yeah, I couldn't be more grateful for everybody who's involved in making this come to life, from Tom Morgan-Jones through to Natasha McClellan, Rob Kempson, who's directing, and all the great actors who have participated in workshops for it, the many people who have read drafts and given me thoughts. Yeah, it's a pretty fantastic moment for me.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you. And finally, what do you hope audiences take from this play?
I hope some deep feelings. I hope some laughter. I hope a fair bit of thought. And I was talking about the play with Matt Carter the other day, and he was saying, yeah, people are gonna, at the end of the play, they're gonna sit there and they'll say, should we drive home now? I'm like, no, we'll just leave the car here and walk.
Yeah.
So maybe not that, but if it inspires
maybe
you.
They'll sell it the next day. Maybe
Exactly.
they'll drive home and then they'll buy a bike on their way home or something.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a bad bike ride to TNB from. I do it all the time from downtown. So
there's good trails in the city. It's possible, folks. It can happen. All right. Well, thank you so much, Len, for this lovely chat. I hope everyone makes it out to Wood Buffalo, a beautiful play that makes time crash together and confronts you with the reality of what humans are doing to the planet.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the conversation, Jenna, and your enthusiasm for the work.